Everything looked completely normal, until the ground began to move. It was a quiet afternoon along Japan's Sanriku coast. Children had just been dismissed from school, fishing boats were preparing to head out, and no one expected that within seconds, the entire country would be thrown into one of the most tense moments in decades. Then suddenly, the ground beneath them refused to stay still. This wasn't a light tremor. It came in waves strong enough to throw people off balance. Windows rattled violently, signs shook overhead, and within seconds, the emergency alert system echoed across cities and towns. A sound Japan has never forgotten since 2011. Far offshore, deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, something massive had just shifted. A magnitude 7.7 earthquake ruptured the silence below the surface. But the most terrifying part isn't what just happened. It's what might already be on the way. Subscribe now to stay updated on the latest developments and understand what's really happening beneath the surface. What do you think? Was this just a single event, or the warning sign of something much bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. At exactly 4:53 p.m. local time, the moment everything changed was officially recorded. A powerful magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck beneath the Pacific Ocean, just 10 kilometers below the surface off Japan's Sanriku coast. The initial readings came in lower, but within hours, scientists revised the numbers upward as more data confirmed the true scale of the rupture. This wasn't just another seismic event. It was the strongest earthquake to hit this region in decades, and its location made it even more dangerous. The rupture occurred along the Japan Trench, one of the most active and volatile subduction zones on Earth. Within seconds, Japan's early warning system activated nationwide. Mobile phones across multiple prefectures lit up with urgent alerts, giving residents only moments to react. Along the coastline, people didn't wait for confirmation. They started moving immediately, heading uphill, away from the ocean. Because in Japan, everyone understands one critical rule. When the ground shakes this close to the sea, the real danger often comes next. The reaction was immediate and precise. Across the Tohoku region, bullet trains traveling at high speed came to a sudden halt mid-route. Automated safety systems activated within seconds, preventing potential derailments. In cities and towns along the coast, emergency protocols that had been drilled for years were now unfolding in real time. Within moments, evacuation orders spread across 182 towns in 7 prefectures. Local authorities had less than 30 seconds to confirm routes and initiate movement toward higher ground. There was no hesitation. People knew exactly what to do. At the Fukushima Daiichi and Daini nuclear power plants, Tokyo Electric Power Company executed a full evacuation of all workers near the shoreline. The decision was not debated, it was automatic. Sirens echoed, phones vibrated. The national emergency alert tone filled homes, streets, and public spaces. It was the same sound that had once signaled one of the darkest days in the country's history. And for many, that memory alone was enough to trigger one instinct. Move. Immediately. The warnings came fast, but the ocean moved faster. Within minutes of the earthquake, abnormal sea level changes began appearing along Japan's northeastern coastline. At Kuji port, the water surged nearly 80 centimeters above normal in a single pulse. In other locations, Miyako, Urakawa, and Hachinohe, waves of 40 centimeters and 30 centimeters were recorded. To an untrained eye, those numbers might not seem catastrophic. But, along a coastline shaped by steep inlets and narrow bays, even a modest rise in water level can amplify rapidly, turning into destructive surges as it pushes inland. And more importantly, these were only the first signs. Tsunamis rarely arrive as a single wave. They come in sequences, each one potentially stronger than the last. The first surge is often not the most dangerous. It's the one that follows, that carries the real force. Along the shore, something even more unsettling was happening. In some areas, the ocean briefly pulled back before rising again, a silent, unmistakable signal that a larger wave could be forming offshore. For those who recognized it, there was no confusion. They had seen this before, and they knew exactly what it meant. Before the tsunami warnings had even been fully lifted, something far more unusual happened. Japan's meteorological agency, together with the Cabinet Office, activated a document that had never been used before in the country's history, a subsequent earthquake advisory for the offshore region of Hokkaido and Sanriku. This wasn't a routine update. It wasn't a precaution. It was a signal that the situation might be far from over. Officials announced that the probability of a magnitude 8 or larger earthquake had increased by a factor of 10 within the next 7 days. That number wasn't speculation. It came directly from statistical models built on decades of seismic data models designed to measure what happens after a major rupture. And the implication was clear. The fault had not fully released its energy. Somewhere beneath the ocean floor, stress was still building quietly, invisibly, and potentially moving toward another breaking point. Inside Japan's scientific community, there was no sense of certainty, only tension. Some believed the estimate might be too conservative, others feared it could already be too late. But no one was calling the situation stable, because history had already shown what can happen next. What if this wasn't the main event? Seismologists are now closely examining one critical detail: the possibility that Monday's magnitude 7.7 earthquake may not be the final rupture, but a foreshock. A foreshock is not just a smaller quake. It is a warning, an early release of energy before something significantly larger follows. And Japan has seen this pattern before. In March 2011, just 2 days before the catastrophic magnitude 9.1 earthquake, a magnitude 7.3 event struck the same region. At the time, it was noted as unusual, but not necessarily alarming. Then, within 48 hours, the fault ruptured across a 400-kilometer segment, unleashing one of the most powerful earthquakes in recorded history. Now, the current event has occurred along that exact same tectonic boundary, the Japan Trench Subduction Zone. That connection changes everything. Because when a fault begins to move in one segment, it doesn't act in isolation. It redistributes stress along adjacent sections, pushing them closer to failure. This is why the current warning matters so much. The earthquake that just happened may have already set the stage for something far larger. And this time, the timeline may be measured not in years, but in days. To understand the danger, you have to look beneath the ocean floor. Off the coast of northeastern Japan lies one of the most violent tectonic boundaries on Earth, the Japan Trench. Here, the Pacific Plate is constantly diving beneath the plate Japan sits on, moving at a rate of roughly 9 centimeters per year. That motion may seem slow, but over time, it builds immense pressure. For years, sometimes decades, the plates don't move smoothly. They lock together, held in place by friction. Energy continues to accumulate silently, with no visible sign on the surface, until it reaches a breaking point. When that happens, the release is sudden and violent. In a matter of seconds, the locked section snaps, sending massive amounts of energy outward. That energy travels through the ground as seismic waves and through the ocean as displacement of water. That's how earthquakes trigger tsunamis. The seafloor shifts, pushing an enormous volume of water upward. And in deep ocean conditions, that energy doesn't dissipate, it travels fast. At speeds comparable to a jet aircraft, tsunami waves can cross entire ocean basins with little loss of power. By the time they reach shallow coastal waters, they slow down but grow dramatically in height, transforming from an invisible force into a moving wall of water. What happened beneath the ocean didn't end when the shaking stopped. In fact, that may have been the moment a much larger process began. Seismologists use a term called static stress transfer to describe what follows a major earthquake. When one segment of a fault ruptures, it doesn't simply release energy, it redistributes it. The sections of the fault next to the rupture zone are suddenly pushed closer to their own breaking point. Think of it like pressure moving through a system. One lock gives way, and the strain shifts to the next. That is exactly what concerns scientists now. According to Japan's aftershock probability models, the first 7 days after a magnitude 7 or greater earthquake are the most critical. During this window, the likelihood of another major event rises sharply before gradually decreasing over time. The current estimate, a 10-fold increase in the probability of a magnitude 8 or larger quake, is not a guess. It's the statistical midpoint of a model built on decades of seismic data. And even that number is being debated. Some experts believe it may underestimate the risk. Others fear it could already reflect a system on the edge. But across the scientific community, one point remains consistent. The fault has not returned to equilibrium, and the pressure is still moving. To understand why this region is so vulnerable, you have to look at its geography. The Sanriku coastline sits directly along the edge of the Japan Trench, an underwater canyon stretching for hundreds of kilometers, plunging more than 8,000 meters at its deepest point. There are no natural barriers here, no wide continental shelf to slow incoming waves, no chain of islands to absorb the force. Just open ocean, meeting land. As tsunami energy travels across deep water, it maintains its speed and power. But when it reaches this kind of coastline, steep, narrow, and sharply indented, it doesn't spread out. It compresses. Wave energy is funneled into tight bays and inlets, forcing the water higher and faster as it pushes inland. What might be a moderate wave in open water can become a devastating surge along this type of terrain. And just beyond the shoreline, the land rises quickly. Mountains sit close behind the coast, leaving little room for escape. Fishing towns and port cities are built in the narrow strip between ocean and rock. Places like Kuji, Miyako, and Otsuchi have faced this exact threat before. They were nearly erased in previous tsunamis. And today, they stand in the same place once again, facing the open sea. About 150 kilometers south of the epicenter lies a location the world has not forgotten, Fukushima Daiichi. Even today, the site still holds approximately 880 tons of melted nuclear fuel inside its damaged reactors. That material has remained in place since the disaster in 2011, continuously cooled but not yet removed. Surrounding the facility are more than 1,000 storage tanks, each containing treated water, still carrying traces of radioactive elements from years of cooling operations. So when the tsunami warning was issued, there was no hesitation. All workers near the shoreline were immediately evacuated to higher ground. The official statement later confirmed that no abnormalities had been detected. But that statement only addressed the present, because the real concern comes from the past. In 2011, the Fukushima disaster was not caused by the earthquake itself. It was caused by the tsunami that followed. A wave exceeding 14 meters overtopped a 10-meter seawall, flooding backup generators and shutting down critical cooling systems. Within hours, reactor cores began to melt. That is the scenario no one wants to see again. And with the current advisory warning of a potential larger event within days, the risk remains. While the data told one story, the ground told another. At exactly 4:53 in the afternoon, classrooms in coastal cities began to shake. In Hachinohe, elementary school students were being dismissed when the tremor hit. Teachers didn't wait for instructions, they grabbed the children and moved uphill immediately. At Kuji Port, fishing boats were already out on the water when the alert sounded. Those still close to shore rushed back, racing against time as the sea began to surge into the harbour. Others, too far to return, turned their boats toward the open ocean, choosing to face the wave head-on rather than risk being caught near land. In Rikuzentakata, a city that lost nearly 10% of its population in 2011, residents moved with urgency, but not panic. Many of them had done this before. They climbed the same evacuation routes, the same staircases. Some of them were children during the last disaster. Now, they were carrying their own children to safety. Across the coastline, the response was fast, coordinated, and deeply personal. Because for many here, this wasn't just a warning. It was a memory coming back to life. By the next morning, the surface appeared calmer. Train lines resumed operations, though at reduced speeds. Tsunami warnings were officially lifted across major ports. Schools reopened, and daily life began to move again. But beneath that sense of normalcy, nothing truly felt stable. Fishing boats remained tied to the docks. At Fukushima, workers continued to patrol the seawall, checking sensors by hand. In coastal towns, emergency drills were repeated over and over, preparing for something that might still come, because the advisory had not expired. For the next 7 days, the probability of another major earthquake remains significantly elevated, higher than anything recorded since 2011. And along the Sanriku coast, people are watching the same ocean that has brought destruction before again and again across generations. The question now is no longer what just happened. It's what happens next. Because deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, the tectonic plates are still moving. Quietly, relentlessly, and building toward whatever comes next. Subscribe now to stay updated on the latest breaking developments and real-time analysis. This situation is still evolving, and every update matters. Join the conversation and share your thoughts below. What do you think happens next? Stay informed, stay aware, and be part of a community that follows the truth as it unfolds.